All right, let's get started. Again, this is the Walnut Creek Chamber of Commerce and Visitors Bureau Civic Affairs Forum. Today it's presented by Wells Fargo Bank, our presenting sponsor, and thank you very much to Wells Fargo. I'm Matt Gishard. I'm chair of the Civic Affairs Committee of the Chamber, and I'm going to welcome Brian Dean. He's a senior VP with Wells Fargo and the commercial banking. So thanks very much and welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Good morning, Matt. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us today. My role at Wells Fargo, I get to work quite a bit with the business owners and the business community, and not only here in the East Bay, but across the Bay Area and across the country many times. But Wells Fargo is focused on key issues to the business community and legislation because we have a long legacy of supporting our customers and our communities, especially in the areas of small business, housing, financial health, sustainability, and other community needs. Regarding small business, it's no secret that small businesses are the heartbeat of our communities. They pump life into our neighborhoods, create vibrant places to live, work, and raise families, and they are crucial to our success. Okay? In fact, about 50% of all Americans are employed by a small business, and over 90% of American businesses are small businesses. The U.S. economy is powered by small businesses, and Wells Fargo is committed to helping them succeed financially. We proudly serve over 3 million small businesses across the U.S. and hold ourselves accountable to earning their trust and putting their needs front and center. We're enhancing our programs, especially as it relates to diverse-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and also veteran-owned businesses. Our goal is to be the bank of choice for small businesses because small business is big business. They're critical to the health and prosperity of local communities and the national economy. We're prioritizing investments that can make banking faster, easier, smarter, and safer for our customers and the entire financial services industry. Our reach is global, but our approach is very much local and personal. So we do get involved quite a bit, as you might have seen in our local communities. In just the Bay Area, we gave approximately $20 million to various causes in 2022. And of that, approximately $750,000 was in Contra Costa County. Our volunteers in the Bay Area, we had 38,000 volunteer hours throughout the Bay Area, and over 11,000 of those were in Contra Costa County. We're very much focused and committed. Many of you, I'm sure, bank with Wells Fargo, and we thank you for that. But we look forward to partnering with all of you to continue to help strengthen our communities. And again, the business community is a lifeblood of most communities, and the topics that we're here to support today, they're very crucial to us and most importantly to our communities. It's a privilege for us to present today's event. And with that, Matt, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Brian, and thanks again to Wells Fargo for being our presenting sponsor. I just want to say the mission of Civic Affairs, of our Civic Affairs Committee, is to focus on matters of economic development, locally and regionally, as well as local government and state government topics. So last year we did a state of the state, and today's forum deals with the state legislature matters and the impact on the business community. So we're grateful to the large number of people who are tuning in today. We're very pleased to see you, and we are pleased today to be joined by Adam Regele he's a VP of Advocacy and Strategic Partnerships at the California Chamber of Commerce. Now we sent out a brief bio of you, Adam, to everyone, but what I always like to do is just to give us the short and sweet of really a bit of your background, more personal.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. And thanks everyone for having me. The short and sweet of it. I grew up in Los Angeles, worked at an environmental NGO, kind of getting my chops early on some environmental issues, went to UC Berkeley and majored in environmental science, went to UC Hastings, now UC College of the Law, San Francisco, I believe, and really started to work, obviously, and train as a lawyer, but really started to understand the business issues rather than just sort of an academic, child, candidly, and started to really blend my environmental expertise with a legal background. And so when I graduated Hastings, I ended up clerking for a judge down in San Jose, and really learning how court decisions are made, or judges make decisions. And then worked for a couple of years in private practice, really doing a lot of CEQA work, mainly from a pro-housing perspective, and made my way all the way up to Sacramento when the chamber was looking for a land use lobbyist. And since I was a lobbyist, since I was a land use attorney, I figured I might as well try working to influence legislation rather than just be reactive to laws. So it's been interesting and I think a very positive career change for me to go from lawyer to lobbyist, and currently managing some other lobbyists at the chamber, but also still work a lot of the environmental issues on behalf of the business community.
Wonderful, and thanks for that. The overall kind of interest of people, and what we'd really like you to talk about today is we talk about a number of pieces of legislation. Sometimes people's hair catch on fire. How did that ever get signed? How did that? But big impacts on the business community. So, I have some notes here, and we're talking about the CalChamber and job killer bills, job bills that the chamber supports, and then bills that the chamber actually opposes. So I think probably to frame it, if you could just give us kind of an overview of how legislation comes up, how it gets passed, and then of course the issue of how does the chamber, and then of course the 400 plus local chambers have impact on that legislation.
Yeah, great questions. Well, I would say the most likely way a bill gets introduced is there's a bunch of special interests, whether they're NGOs or local governments or private businesses. They'll have ideas that they think should be law, and candidly, they go out and they, generally speaking, in an part of the off session, they'll go office to office looking for someone to run and carry their idea. And personally, I think from the chamber's perspective, we see a lot of bad ideas get picked up by members. A lot of members will run it based on just who the organization may be. So the idea itself may not even be something they care about or that passionate about. But if it is by a prominent group or has some, I think political goodwill that could help their career or their ability to serve as the elected in their constituents. It's a little bit of a cynical. I think a lot of them do run bills that they truly believe in and will help constituents. But I would say often the bills that chamber is prioritizing, whether it's a job killer or a strong oppose, they're often really bad special interest bills that a trial attorney group runs that will have dire implications for a business, or it's a very laudable concept on environmental issues to improve our environment, but has really no grounding in how that sector that they're going after operates, or the political or policy trade-offs. We can implement perfectly safe streets, but you will have a massive cost to doing that. And so all public policy is a balance, fiscal balance, et cetera. A lot of the bills I think we see in California really only look at these issues from a one lens perspective. And that's why we do actually support bills, as you noted, but oftentimes we have a laundry list of opposition in California legislature. I think sometimes we see ourselves as really, I don't want to say the adult in the room, because it's not to be to put anyone down, but just we're really fact checking and policy checking the ideas. And given the building is truly one party dominated, a super majority, there aren't a whole lot of checks and balances left. And so it truly, to get to your second question about how local chambers and CalChamber operate, it truly takes a quote unquote village to defeat some of the really controversial things, especially when they're run by either Democratic leadership or is the backing of unions or strong environmental groups or both. You're really in a world of political hurt without that collective village. And so I would say, and this predates me, but you talk to anyone, a couple decades ago, maybe you could do all your business in Sacramento and not necessarily think about the ground game, as we call it, or your grassroots business advocacy. I think that world is long gone. That ship has sailed, and with this political climate, if you aren't talking to your local representatives and leveraging your local chambers to really get, mom and pop businesses to voice a concern on a bad business bill, talking to their local assembly member or senator, you're in a world of pain. And so I think what the chamber's perspective, the CalChamber's perspective is this network of local chambers across the state is really the lifeline of the business community and needs to effectively weigh in at various points of the legislative process to truly have any influence in today's politics, at least in California.
Well, certainly a good basic foundation. There are so many questions that come up, and you're talking about decades ago, how it used to be. I used to run an office, a law office in Sacramento, and we used to kind of laugh and say so much legislation was actually agreed upon at Frank Fat's down the street restaurant when everybody talked. Now we appreciate that there isn't much talking or much middle ground anymore. But the real question then comes up is, how do we influence as business people, as chambers? There are 400 plus local chambers across the state. And the concern is, okay, when we hear about legislation, sometimes it's too late. It's been passed, it's done. But when we hear of it, it hasn't reached the governor's desk yet. What can we do? How can we advocate instead of all of us going to Sacramento? What do we do if we can do it?
Well, I think it's if it's not obvious, I'll plug the PACs, because I really think the ability to even get to a member's door, through that door, and say, can I get a meeting? Can I just talk about a bill? I'm not asking you yet what your vote will be, but let me just talk to you about an issue. To get even through that front door, you need to be supporting these members. And I'm talking about financially, in order for them to know, okay, this person or this group, this local chamber, this business, they supported me, they have my back. I'll at least hear them out. This is not, again, they're going to necessarily vote for you. They have very specific politics for their jurisdiction, and any particular bill, they're talking to their chief of staff and their consultants to say, is this vote up or down going to hurt or help me, or have no effect? And so there's always that calculus for them, but they're not even going to necessarily take that meeting, because they're taking 15, 30-minute meetings because their calendar is just back to back of folks requesting to talk to them. So I would say, candidly, from a chamber's perspective, if there's an ability to get involved in a PAC, I would highly recommend it. It just amplifies your ability to have a voice in Sacramento. It's kind of one thing I'd recommend. The next thing is early. I can't tell you how many bills folks come in, because there's so much being introduced. There's thousands of bills introduced. It's no fault that you may not have heard about it as early as I would say would be necessary. But to the extent you can try to, and this is really where I think CalChamber tries to help keep the pulse on Sacramento, to then push out, these are what we're seeing, hearing, to the local chambers who may not be on the ground up here. But for all intents and purposes, the earlier you can engage on a bill, the overall better. It I think translates better to leadership to understand, okay, we now have a controversial bill. Each committee, you're starting to beat it up, almost, at least in my environmental issue area, and I think if you're in the labor bill territory, but candidly, almost all committees now, you're going to likely get these bills through, these controversial bad business bills through these committees. Not always, but a lot of times they're so greased, the committee makeups are so one-sided, they're getting out on partisan votes. But I will say, even though it looks like we're losing, it's chipping away at these bills, and you're raising the profile of them such that members who aren't on that committee, who are Democrats, who will be asked to vote on that if it makes it to the floor, are starting to hear this is a problem. They start to hear from their local chambers that if this bill gets to the floor, it's a problem for your community, for your local businesses. And that starts to really build a crescendo such that if you are on the floor and the numbers are extremely tight, where a defeat of a bill basically requires a perfect Republican caucus, almost all of the mods, and there's a lot of them, you have to corral almost all of them. And then, you can lose a few and you may defeat that bill. But if you don't get those two big buckets, these bills fly off, and it is unlike anything a couple decades ago. I think, again, it predates my time, but you're really needing to start the drumbeat early on bills. And so that, I think the one thing I'll recommend also is for local chambers, the ability to position quicker than ever. Obviously, we have to do vetting and we have to talk to our members, et cetera. But to the ability to not necessarily, we only take a position at each quarterly board meeting will be really difficult to have any, I would say, influence as bills change so quickly in this process. So to the ability to have what we have policy guidelines that help basically shape where CalChamber will position such that we aren't on a board quarterly schedule for positioning. Just, it's not possible for all local chambers, but I've seen some make those transitions, and then they can stay relevant throughout a very dynamic legislative process.
Thanks. We do have a PAC here, East Bay Leadership PAC. It's regional in this area. And Bob has certainly put that together, and it's something. And when we look at, say, policy platforms, I think that's the concept of trying to get out ahead of things.
Yeah.
And so I think we're doing that. There is a bit of frustration, however, and I use a term that one of our former chamber chairs, Ed Del Beccaro, often uses, and that is the unintended consequences. So never minding what side of the aisle somebody sit on, sometimes a bill is passed and everyone all of a sudden appreciates, once it's in effect, that the unintended consequences are much worse than the good deal that they thought when they, this makes sense, we'll do this. Yeah. And people say, well, yeah, let's do it. How do we undo? Or is it possible at some point, when lots of people recognize the unintended consequences of some legislation that is passed?
That's a good question. I think, it's a sort of a lawyerly answer of it depends, because certain issues are so greased and so politically charged that, if you have, I forgot which bill it was, but there was a bill where Biden administration's weighing in, you have Gavin weighing in, those types of policies, if you ever see one where you have federal pressure from the administration, those are so greased they're going. But most bills, we are raising those unintended consequences. And I think a lot of folks kind of feel businesses doing a cry wolf. They always say it's going to put jobs out. So we do need to be careful, I think, in terms of how we elevate certain profiles. We can't just always say it's going to kill jobs. And when they ask for what jobs were killed, we candidly, we try not to create a formulaic on job killer, to be candid. But I do think we are extremely, at least at CalChamber, careful about how we tag that, because we don't do it from a political perspective of, well, that's a really bad bill, let's just say it kills jobs and then move on from there. There is a whole calculus we do on the back end. It is proprietary, so we don't want to give that formula to the NGOs, for example. But I will say, I think on unintended consequences, they like you to articulate specifically how that is, not just, hey, this is going to have unintended consequences like loss of jobs. We do try to take the next step and explain that. But I will say there's a bill right now, AB 421 by Isaac Bryan, that is trying to unwind, 100 years of precedent around going to the ballot to effectively unwind a terrible mistake by the legislature. They're looking at that on the franchise bill and on the oil and gas setback bill, this ballot season. And so if that were to change per Isaac's 421, it's specifically a union play and folks to try to remove, to your point, Matt, one of the last real ways to unwind a terrible, like an AB5 type bill where, you know, you go Prop 22 to try to fix what was done in Sacramento. So that I would say if you aren't looking at 421, some changes are coming that Chamber has helped negotiate. I don't think we're there yet by any means on that bill, but it made some significant changes. Like if the signature list doesn't have the top most current 5 donors, then all your signatures for that day are basically rendered invalid. And since the amount of money that flows into any particular ballot initiative could change pretty rapidly, maintaining that the folks on the ground outside the supermarket have the exact top 5 for that current moment in time, or all signatures are rendered invalid, is, you can see an easy way to help, or I should say, to stifle the referendum process. So that's a bill to keep a pulse on, to have that mechanism to unwind a bad bill effectively.
Well, an example, obviously local businesses, everyone across the state is feeling the impact of increase in theft, shoplifting, that kind of thing. And the citizens, the names of Prop 57 and Prop 47, I think everyone kind of jumped on board and said, gosh, this makes a lot of sense. But I've heard that there's some legislation that has been brought, that attempted to be brought, to not throw out the whole thing, but to go at certain things that certainly business would support. And what's the flavor in SAC for fixing at least the legislation for those 2 propositions?
Yeah, I don't know if I have the answer to that one. I will say, since you mentioned the receipts, well, you didn't mention receipts, you mentioned retail theft, and I wanted to mention receipts. There's a bill, and this is not helpful for business. This is one to keep an eye on if you have any retail in your district, because they haven't addressed the retail theft. It's a growing issue, and the irony is the author who's running this bill, AB 1347, is from the very jurisdiction suffering the most retail theft, San Francisco. This is an Assemblymember Phil Ting bill, and it effectively removes the ability for businesses to print paper receipts. Originally, that's how it started. It was a paper receipt ban, forced everyone to go into electronic receipts, which may make sense for certain businesses, and they'll go that route. It didn't make sense for other small businesses that couldn't afford it. But what I will say is, for folks who do door checkout and want to look at a paper receipt, 1347 removes their ability to have a paper receipt door check. So if you think about a last line of defense for a retail theft issue in California, I do think the folks in Sacramento should really take a pause on 1347. It's been beat up all along the way.
Uh-oh. We lost you for a minute. Your feed, Adam. All right, I think I'm sure he'll be back any minute. We certainly hope. Of course, the question is, and we've talked about it a lot, is what do we as businesses do to influence? And I think we've certainly gotten some answers. What I do want to ask him is, here we go. Is he? There he is. Okay.
Sorry, I'm actually in Bandon, Oregon at an event, so I'm on hotel Wi-Fi. Apologies.
Okay, we won't ask you which hotel. Okay.
There's not too many in Bandon, so you can easily find me.
Well, clearly we're interested, and we often like to think that our businesses, many people are on one side or the other, but in terms of wanting to promote business, we're all right down the middle. And so that's how we feel locally. And, we don't get the sense sometimes that in Sacramento, people are hearing exactly what local businesses need or want. But a big thing that I like to ask, because we've been talking a little bit of negatively how things work, what I'd like you to do, if you wouldn't mind, is tell us some of the important achievements of the CalChamber that you can talk about to kind of let's give a positive spin on some of the things that the Chamber has done in SAC by way of legislation. There's that feed again. And it's Bandon, Oregon, huh? Okay.
So
So
Matt,
sorry, I'm gonna go off video to minimize my bandwidth, and otherwise I'll call in. So sorry about
Okay.
this Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Go ahead with your question, Matt. I only caught half of it. I
Oh,
apologize.
yeah. So we're just talking about some important achievements the CalChamber has made with respect to legislation and all that. Let's talk on the positive side.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple bills that I think really should be focused on this year. I mean, there's obviously the two job creator bills, SB 301 by Portantino. It's really to help the transition to zero emission. As we all know, there's the executive order to move to zero emission vehicles by 2035. SB 301 is to help the aftermarket conversion, because there's a concept that there's going to be a ton of ICE or internal combustion vehicles on the road. Are we going to be really living this duality, into 2040, into 2050? And so there's a concept that I think there's going to be the need to convert cars to electric. That's at least the thought under the Portantino bill. That one's been, it's pretty much only a pro credit to businesses who can help the conversion market. So that's that one. SB 619 and SB 420. 619 is a Padilla bill and 420 is a Becker bill. There was this huge package the governor ran this year on infrastructure and streamlining the CEQA back-end process. When I'm talking back-end, I'm talking litigation. And we're really looking at an expedited litigation route, but it doesn't help streamline CEQA on the front end at all. None of the infrastructure stuff eliminates requirements or otherwise expedites the preparation of the documents. And so 619 and 420 are about electric infrastructure. That's transmission lines, undergrounding transmission lines, transfer stations, substations. Effectively, if we're going to reach, which are already past mandates on clean energy, this is law. This is already stuff that we have to move towards. The Cal ISO, CPUC, CEC, they're all saying we're about 5x below the rate we need to get there on. And so if you don't streamline CEQA, we can't even build the clean energy infrastructure to get to those mandates. 619 and 420 are front-end CEQA streamlining for that. Anything where you touch CEQA is pretty much a third rail for NGOs. I think the difference here is we're really trying to bring labor along. And so when you talk about reaching across the aisle and how can businesses, collaborate or work more effectively, there are opportunities to work with labor when there's an alignment effectively of, we want this project, we're willing to effectively, we know we're gonna have to pay, say, prevailing wage, because to build this massive infrastructure, we're not going to unlikely get around that. And you can really create alliances where, if you have the political might of the labor and the business community, can a couple NGOs who are just opposed to ever touching CEQA going to stop it? Maybe. There's a lot of gatekeepers in Sacramento, but you have a heck of a better shot doing so. Job killers that are directly ran by labor. And so we're constantly in this interesting dynamic of opposing some of their top priorities while pragmatically working with them on other issues where there's a symbiotic business labor component there. So those are a couple bills I would flag. There's also a manufacturer's credit. Grayson's ran this before. I think it got held up. But this year we're more hopeful. AB 52 by Grayson is an income tax credit, basically sales and use taxes. They're already paid. So the manufacturing and research and development equipment, we think if you give an income tax credit, the idea is to try to keep manufacturing whatever's left. I'm not saying there's a ton, but we really want to preserve as much manufacturing here in California. We've obviously exported a lot of manufacturing through bad policies over the decades.
Interesting. I think a success, and I want your take on it. A success is kind of the unintended consequences of some of the old laws as it relate to disabilities and how they impact businesses. So we've heard of a number of members of the bar who do these lawsuits all over. Sometimes they have a Google map and find out that some business doesn't have just the right number of placards for disability in their parking lot. And now that has changed. I think businesses very much appreciate that. So is that a success that the CalChamber had something to do with? That kind of thing is fixing some of the unintended consequences and the abuse. We lost Adam a bit. Again, we've got his picture.
Sorry, Matt, I might have to call him on my phone, but I heard most of your question about trial attorneys, sort of being predators on businesses. I mean, that's why so many of the job killer bills in the labor sector are really driven by trial attorneys and are framed as this is going to help employees or consumers, when we know the lion's share of the revenue, so to speak, is in the pockets of the trial attorneys, 33 to 40%, you know, on a contingency basis. Taxes eat up a lot of the rest, and then, you know, for a class action, everybody gets a little bit of crumbs, and they claim that's helping the consumer or the employee class. When you look at settled cases or those brought by the agency versus a PAGA claim, you see a tremendously higher, like 4x to 5x going to the actual employee when it's not a PAGA claim. So that's a huge issue, which is why when they try to expand different labor laws, they're really doing it because the trial attorneys are pushing it, and that is a huge problem in Sacramento. It's also analogous in the environmental world. If you look at Prop 65, the quote unquote everything causes cancer in California, folks are slapping warning labels all over the place because it gives you insulation from liability. But there are folks that literally send folks out to buy goods all over in small mom and pop shops to try to find a product to test for, to find an iota of a chemical, and then they can sue you for causing cancer when the exposure is a wrench, for example, and it has nickel or something in it. They'll try to argue there's cancer. The issue is to prove that, hey, just handling that is not going to cause anything is so costly. You get what we call shakedown lawsuits. It's like, well, we'll go away if you give us $30,000. They know if you go hire a decent law firm, you do a motion to dismiss, you're already up at 30,000, and then the case gets started, you're probably in for 6 figures or more. So we always are careful for any expansion of PAGA or things like PAGA, where you're basically empowering trial attorneys to serve as an attorney general or a city attorney. They generally have, I have to be careful, but their integrity, or I'd say their interests are debatable whether it's always in the public interest.
Why don't you tell us? I think the audience would really like, we've heard so much about PAGA. What is PAGA? I know I'm a lawyer, but
Sure.
From the perspective, certainly the CalChamber, what is PAGA? And what's bad about it? Is there anything good about it? Let us know.
Yeah, I mean, the PAGA stands for the Private Attorney General's Act, and the concept there is it's Attorney General Bonta now, but whatever the Attorney General is at the time, it's such a large state that we can't expect the Attorney General to litigate every potential bad employer out there, and there maybe wage theft or other issues. That the concept behind PAGA is we will empower trial attorneys to represent employees and step into the shoes as the Attorney General to enforce the labor laws, because there's so many different businesses and it's such a big state. Let's empower them to act as the Attorney General. They have to bring it in the quote unquote public interest. And of course, you're spending your time, so of course the attorney should get a cut of it, is the concept there. Otherwise, no one would ever take a case. And contingencies allow folks who don't have money to pay hourly to have an effective representation. That's the basic concept. I think in theory, it makes a lot of sense, except when you talk about a class action and there's millions of dollars at stake, whether they're bringing that because they care about the employees or the money, I think that's where you find a lot of perverse interests start to come out of the woodwork. And then the expansion of PAGA, where I personally don't know its full historical legislative evolution, but I imagine it started smaller and then, hey, let's add on this. Because every year we're opposing bills where they're just adding and expanding FIHA and other, areas of the law, such that what may have made sense 30 or 40 years ago doesn't make sense when you have basically ballooned this law so much so that you really create an incentive for folks to shake down businesses to get that PAGA money. So since you mentioned it, there is a ballot initiative. We're basically helping to run a campaign to amend PAGA to really limit its abuse, candidly. And so look for that in the November ballot. But that's a big one that the business community, and there's a lot of folks financially helping to support that. So to the extent you haven't, there's a way to get more involved. Chamber is one of the points to do that. Your local chamber may also be helping to flow money into it. It's a huge deal. It's one of the growing liabilities for small, medium, and large businesses across the state.
That is interesting, because we keep talking about, forming a PAC and seeing what can we do or what should be done. And then part of it, of course, is local and statewide elections. What impact can we have, and what should we be doing? And I guess the bigger question is, what is your take on local and regional election issues coming up for 2024?
Yeah, we haven't positioned on everything. We're going to support the Taxpayer Protection Act, so look at that one. I think we know rent control. I think it's the same gentleman, the AIDS Foundation gentleman, who runs a ton of rent control initiatives, every season, and then bills actually in the legislature. But we are adamantly opposed that rent control is the answer to the housing crisis. I mean, if you just look at the jurisdictions that have rent control, we're not seeing that as a bright spot in terms of how to handle affordable housing for folks. We are a pro-housing organization who thinks that the simple answer is supply. And I mean, it's not a simple answer, but it is certainly the correct, I think, one. It's so difficult to build housing here. It's not further restricting supply and the ability to pencil units with a rent control policy. So we'll be opposing that. We haven't taken an official position. I think it just recently qualified. I'd also, keep an eye out. There's going to be a lot of bonds that are working their way through. I think most will be negotiated in January, but that could have some obviously important impacts to your region. And there's going to be a minimum wage increase, and we'll be opposing that. I think the market's increased wages across the board. I think to keep doing arbitrary minimum wage increases to basically try to solve a housing crisis. I mean, if you think about it, folks can't afford to live, a lot of areas, a lot of regions across the state, and their solution isn't to address how do we bring down the cost of living, how to bring down the cost of housing. They're constantly saying, all right, businesses, just pay more to your employees. We're going to keep increasing wages across the board. And I really think that's missing the true issue here, which is the cost of living crisis across the state.
Thank you for that. And I think one of the frustrations with, chambers and then individual voters, whichever side of the political divide they're on, or right down the middle, is, I want to say, almost bushwhacked when it comes to, say, bonds or legislation or propositions. That means we're told something, but we really don't have the full story. And it's a question for you from the CalChamber, at the CalChambers, where do we gather information? How do we, as a local chamber, gather information about something that really tells us whether this is something that's good for us or not good for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we try to do that. We do a local chamber call every Thursday where our CalChamber team kind of breaks down the big bills of the week. It's not really it would take a couple hours to do if we did like here's every bill that you should be tracking kind of thing. But we do have at the chamber different policy committees where you'll see what bills we position on. You can be a part of that actually as a local chamber affiliate. And so whether it's the labor committee, the environmental committee, the energy committee, there's basically a bunch of committees here at chamber where you can plug into. We don't meet like every week, so it's actually kind of a light workload. It's probably like quarterly, but you can see like, here's all the bills we're going to position on. You could actually then go to our website and track as you go through. This is again CalChamber's perspective, and so there are bills that other businesses may be positioned on that we're not for whatever reason, whether it's our membership didn't care about it, a conflict of membership, various reasons. That's one way to do it. It's actually a really kind of clunky. I mean, Ledge Info or any of the state websites. It's not a very friendly place to go get information, and so I don't think there's like a great repository where you can just kind of one-stop shop, which is candidly how we try to help local chambers at CalChamber. So I would say that's my recommendation for business track bills, at least that CalChamber is tracking. Otherwise, you can go to other associations. Like if you're interested in food issues, Consumer Brands is doing something similar. If you care about chemical regulations, the American Chemistry Council has it. But for a general, what does the business community care about? Again, not exhaustive, but kind of relatively comprehensive. I will ping our own chamber for doing that, CalChamber.
Well, good. I want to say that's kind of the whole reason for this forum.
Okay.
Kind of give people a thought about here, job killer bills or jobs that we oppose and all. Let me ask
Thursdays at 3. Thursdays at 3, Matt, would be the if you haven't got plugged into the CalChamber's local chamber call. Thursdays at 3. Nick Ortiz, you may know that Nick Ortiz and Jennifer Johnson run that at CalChamber. Two great people.
Well, I certainly know our CEO, President Bob Lynchide, is very much. What I really wanted was our
Awesome.
audience to listen and say, okay, here's something that's going on. Let me jump to a question that often comes up, and that is we hear about legislation that is passed through the legislature and it is sitting on the governor's desk. The question is, how do we lobby that? What is the mechanism that the CalChamber does and perhaps others to influence the governor to not sign? Because we certainly hear at times the governor vetoed one piece of legislation or another.
The CalChamber's policy is we keep all of our veto request letters confidential. You'll see every other letter into the building, whether it's the Assembly or Senate Policy Committee or floor, is a public document that we put on our website. The interesting is for the veto request, it's almost a private, direct ask to Governor Gavin Newsom. And so we generally draft those in confidentiality. If you've seen we've opposed a bill all the way through, it gets through and it's on his desk. To your point, Matt, you can bet we're submitting one of those, but you won't ever see one of those letters, at least not in any of the public forums. And that's not necessarily to say you have to do it that way. That's just articulating how CalChamber does its formal request. We also will request, and this again, supporting the governor helps get you a meeting at least fulfilled on his calendar. Whether he does what you ask is a whole other calculus, and there's a lot of factors that he's got to balance. But we're generally submitting those confidential letters in and then reinforcing by having meetings, whether it's with it's very rarely with the governor himself, obviously, but with his respective deputies. We're going in there and explaining the look, putting what happened in the Assembly and Senate aside. Here's all the politics as to why it got to your desk. Here's truly why signing this is a terrible policy, a terrible law to put in California. Here's how it's going to impact businesses across the state. Here's how it's going to impact the economy. Like, you really don't want to be the governor who signed this particular piece of bad legislation into law. And then, you hope for the best, candidly, and he'll have whatever consultants and advisors helping him guide, his ultimate pen. But that's generally how we've done it. And on job killers, when I think it's fair to say that everyone only has a certain number of quote unquote asks. So, you know, if you have 50 bills on his desk and you want all 50 to be vetoed, good luck, you know. But if you've prioritized and you've really, that's why like a lot of this is you're prioritizing, you're cutting deals because you know, like, look, if you don't cut a deal on this and it gets to his desk, there's no way the governor is going to have any political cover to veto this. It's just too sensitive, it's too controversial, et cetera. I would say strategically, and that's part of what we're doing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, is here's all the bills that the business community hates. Here's bills that we can cut deals on. Here's where we can reach across the aisle, and here's the middle ground on this. And again, you have to do that mainly because the politics are so bad. And then B, you want to have a very tight list at the very end at worst, in which you can say, I'm making a few asks here. Here's the terrible, the stuff that got through that we couldn't cut a deal on, or the other side was so unreasonable on that there's no way to work with them. You need to veto this. This should not be rewarded in the law, that kind of thing. So that's a general advice that may be applicable, but may not be to your organization.
Yeah, interesting, because I think that's applied as long as I've been around and interested in what happens in Sacramento. Whatever governor, you hear these numbers, these incredible numbers of bills that reach the governor's desk, and then interestingly, an incredible number that the governor vetoes. We hear that all the time. And the wonder always is which, I mean, some high profile ones, it comes out and we hear the governor vetoed this for some reason, didn't like it, didn't mean that the concept wasn't right, but wants to shift it back to the legislature to perhaps fix things. So give us an example of, say, the number of bills that the governor sees each year at the end of session.
Well, I think we see about 2,200 bills. I mean, it's rough, but like there's a couple 2,000 bills generally are introduced. What's the attrition rate? I think he'll see between 600 and 1,000 bills maybe get to his desk. You know who would know this would be if everyone knows a Chris Regele. He is the guy in SAC that tracks every bill introduced, how many bills make it, all the statistics behind it. I know he's going to be disappointed in me because I don't have that number off the top of my head, how many bills, but I'm happy to circle back and get it for you. But yeah, if you don't know Chris Regele, he's kind of the professor of the legislature, as we call him. He's also a professor at Regele.
We'll get to know him, I think. All
Oh,
right.
okay, you haven't got to know him yet. Yeah, he's
I haven't.
phenomenal guy.
I'm sure Bob knows him well. So.
Bob probably knows him.
I'm just the moderator here. Well, we're talking about job killer bills. Are there any we haven't discussed that just so come to mind in your thoughts that it would be helpful to let us know so that perhaps we as business people in our PAC could have some influence or something coming up?
Certainly, SB 253, it's not a job killer, but it is the climate disclosure bill. I think it seems, just to be clear, like it only impacts the biggest of the big because it has a $1 billion price tag. I'll just note that the way it's structured is it goes all the way down to what's called scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 and 2 are more your direct, what did you put out of your stack? What is it directly associated with your production line, et cetera. Scope 3 is you calculating, okay, how much did the water delivery guy who brings one water jug every week, how much do you think his emissions added to your business from his truck coming to your business? Because it goes down to that level of detail, one, we think the entire calculus will likely be in a flawed one in which, the way you calculate that scope 3 truck for your Culligan water guy is not going to be the same way someone else calculates it. You're not going to have an apples to apples comparison. So we don't even think the entire bill makes much sense. But I will say it will impact the smallest of small businesses because the large $1 billion business that may be utilizing a small business for a widget is going to ask you to calculate how much does it cost to make your widget, because we as the $1 billion company need that information for us to comply with 253. And so it will have a downstream impact on all businesses that effectively are part of a larger stream of commerce that may trigger a business that is implicated in 253. So 253 is Senator Wiener's, I think, like third attempt at a climate disclosure bill. I think it narrowly died by one vote on the floor. This is a very difficult bill. I personally, and not to bet against the business community, but I could see this one going to the governor's desk and being, to your point, Matt, a veto request. But if there's a ton of local chambers weighing in saying, stop saying this is only about big business, you are making small businesses calculate this stuff, they're impacted just as much. I think that will be helpful because, again, they're really voting on this bill saying, I'm sure your $1 billion business can absorb this cost. And that's not the real necessary issue. There's so many bad labor bills. I don't know if I can really, I mean, SB 365 is Wiener, same author. It's basically a way to kill arbitration. And I know arbitration agreements are extremely important for small, basically all size businesses. It's likely going to run afoul of the Federal Arbitration Act, which the Ninth Circuit has already struck down another bill, AB 51 from Gonzalez in 2019. This bill is probably on the same trajectory. The irony of it is when bills are so unconstitutional that they'll be legally unwound, you actually, when you argue that, which is the correct argument, you'll actually see the legislature sometimes go, then what's the harm then? If it's going to be overturned anyways, I might as well not piss off all of labor, take my vote. And then if it's illegal, the courts will unwind it, whatever. So I actually could see 365 getting through on that basis alone, because that's exactly how 51 got through. And then it gets litigated, everyone spends a bunch of money, and it gets unwound by the courts because we knew from the very beginning it was unconstitutional. Or I should say, in this case, federally preempted, not unconstitutional.
Very interesting concept that I see. Yeah, voting for something knowing that ultimately it's going to be.
Yeah, you see that also with vetoes. If you see Gavin Newsom on an issue where he's flagging that he'd be opposed to it, but the politics for the individual members are, it's a really bad, union bill, for example.
I see.
Vote for it, Sometimes you kind of get a perverse incentive for them to vote for it, since it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, it's going to get vetoed. Don't worry about it. So anyway, I would say any of our job killers on the labor front are going to be bad for all size businesses. Some of them expand leave. There's a minimum wage increase one on there for, I think, healthcare. I think it's a Durazo bill. There's one that bans or chills the ability for businesses to have meetings in which there's even a flavor of regulation or legislation as banned political speech. That will have massive implications. And then 524, I'll flag the last one, is 524 by Wicks. It's a discrimination bill about quote unquote family caregivers. It sounds like, well, of course that's something we should protect, but it's so broadly defined that it is a litigation bait for the trial attorneys. It's run by trial attorneys. This is one to keep. There's a ton of local chambers on it already, so thank you. But AB 524 by Wicks is a job killer that will have bad implications on small, medium, and large businesses. I'll stop there, Matt.
Okay, well, thanks. And actually good timing, because our forum, usually we could talk for, if we were just sitting in a room, 2 or 3 hours, it's still not covered, but
no,
our
exactly.
forum goes for an hour. The people kind of expect that we can bleed over a little bit, but I want to thank you very much. Lots of food for thought, lots of concern for businesses, and lots of food for thought. But I want to thank you very much for appearing for us here today and answering a lot of these questions. And again, a thank you out to Wells Fargo Bank and Brian Dean today. I'm going to put it back to Bob Lynchide, our president and CEO. And thank you, Bob. It's all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, for taking your time today to brief us on the process in Sacramento. What I think you've clarified appropriately so is that local chambers play a key role in assisting in these coalitions that we've built. Many of the bills that you talked about, we've identified as part of our coalition. And on the website, you'll see position letters as well, folks. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me, but I'm on those weekly calls, 3 o'clock on Thursdays. Adam is there a lot. The unintended consequences that Matt was talking about, you don't realize how difficult the job is at the CalChamber with the volume of progressive, and I say progressive because I don't know another word, that's anti-business in some respects. And so, Adam, I appreciate you and your colleagues' efforts in that regard. We do have a
Thanks, Bob.
policy platform on our website. If anybody's interested in how we take positions, we inform our board when that is the case. But I just want to encourage all of you to stay in tune with us on Civic Affairs. We may be meeting in person next month. We meet just prior to the last day that bills need to be passed, which according to my calendar is September 14th. Then the interim recess begins upon adjournment of that. So we will ask our local representatives, whether it's the staffers or whatever, to come in person, and we'll be taking a look at the final stage of this before the recess. So I want to thank everybody for attending and wish you all have a good day. And Adam, see you on the call soon.
Thanks so much, and thanks, everybody.